Hello there, John Gouldthorp here, the life coach of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Today I'm going to be correcting some common misconceptions about particular mental illness related terminology. Now, as per usual, I'm not a registered mental health professional. This video should not be taken to constitute advice of any sort. If you have concerns about your own well-being or someone else's well-being, please seek the advice of a registered medical practitioner. This video is simply meant to correct some common misunderstandings. So today I'm going to be referring to multiple terms related to mental illness that are often misused and explaining the true meaning. Now, the first three terms are narcissist, sociopath, and psychopath. And these are often used in a somewhat loose or interchangeable way, especially psychopath and sociopath, but they all have distinctly different meanings. Now, a narcissist is someone who has an unrealistically inflated sense of self-importance and entitlement, and an intense self-focus. And so great is this that they desperately want other people to like them, and can often negatively affect other people because their focus on themselves leads them to not focus on others' best interests, lack empathy, and exploit others for personal validation. Now, often we hear of narcissists being referred to in cases of childhood abuse or domestic abuse. It's often cited that people who commit these particular acts are narcissists. Not in every case is an abuse perpetrator a narcissist. However, there are a large number of recorded cases of pathological narcissists or people who display narcissistic traits having been abusers. And the most likely explanation for this is that when a person has such an intense self-focus, they will often act in ways that, while allow them to fulfill their need for personal validation, are also harmful to other people. So the key aspect of narcissism is the need for validation through their own acts and seeking other people's attention. Now, by comparison, sociopath and psychopath are often used quite interchangeably, and they're often used to refer to people perceived as violent or evil. There are, however, distinctions. Sociopath is now a relatively informal term, and it's used to refer to somebody who has a diagnosed antisocial personality disorder. And this disorder is characterized by someone having little or no regard for other people's rights, social norms, or rules. Often this is due to a lack of empathy, however, it can also be due to impulsivity or a lack of understanding of the importance of these ideas. And it often manifests as purposefully and overtly, and often impulsively, acting in ways that upset or harm others, and usually it resulting in little remorse for the person committing the act. And sometimes they may even gain pleasure from it. So the key aspect here is an overt disregard for other people's rights. Now, by comparison, being a psychopath is not technically an official diagnosis. It's actually a set of traits with its own separate criteria. Now, in comparison to a psychopath would rarely, if ever, overtly act in a way that causes harm to others. Rather, they maintain a relative appearance of normality and pretend to feel normal emotions and behave in ways that are relatively within boundaries of social norms in order to obtain other people's trust and to exploit them for personal gain. And this extends to their relationships with other people, which tend to be superficial and planned to provide the impression that they care about them whilst only using them for their own purposes. So, while a sociopath tends to act impulsively in harming other people, a psychopath tends to be planful and tends to choose those actions based on the specific benefits that they have for them personally. Now, the next term is psychotic or psychosis, and people often refer to somebody who is mentally disturbed in some way as psychotic. However, it doesn't generically mean that. Psychosis is a specific experience in which a person can't differentiate reality from imagination or fantasy. And often it's constituted by hallucinations, which are experiencing some sort of sensation, that is to say, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, or feeling, without there being something there to sense. And some of the most common hallucinations are auditory, which is heard, or visual, which is seen, and delusions, which are beliefs that cannot possibly be true and which the person will not change despite obvious evidence to their contrary. A related term is schizophrenia, which is a particular mental illness that people often mischaracterize. Some call it split personality disorder, which then leads them to believe that it means having multiple personalities. That's actually a myth. Schizophrenia is derived from German words meaning broken or split personality, but it doesn't refer to having multiple personalities. That's a completely different illness. Schizophrenia is marked by a pattern of disturbed mental functioning that includes hallucinations, delusions, abnormal language uses, abnormal emotional reactions, and the inability to sustain certain experiences, for example, pleasure or focus. Now, many of these terms are often used to refer to somebody who displays signs of mental disturbance or who displays generically erratic behavior or even aggression. What's important to understand is that these terms refer to very specific phenomena and they're not what we would call common. People tend to use these terms way too commonly and use them to stigmatize people. What's important to understand is that the purpose of a diagnosis is to understand and refer to specifically a type of phenomena that a person is experiencing so that we can best help that person. It shouldn't be used to label people, and these terms shouldn't be used to generically to refer to somebody who is abnormal in some way, because this is not only incredibly stigmatizing, it also weakens the effectiveness of language use for a specific purpose. What also needs to be understood is that words that are often used generically to refer to people with extreme mental disturbances often connote ideas of violence. And what's important to understand is that severe mental illness does not immediately mean violent tendencies. My experience is definitely not everybody's experience, but I'm mentally ill myself and I've worked with a large number of mentally ill individuals over the years. Very few of them have been known to be violent in any way, and I've personally never witnessed violence. If anything, the average person afflicted with a mental illness is actually more at danger from somebody else's stigma and somebody else's prejudice than they are a danger to other people. So it's important that we work towards combating that stigma, because in the end, the stereotypes are not necessarily accurate and they're contributing to continued prejudice. Now, the final term which I'm going to discuss is obsessive compulsive, referred to often in obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD. This term is often used to refer to people who have particular attentions to detail or who like to undertake specific actions or make specific arrangements in particular ways and tend to be particular about maintaining those standards. That's not what it means. In order to be obsessive compulsive, a number of factors have to be present. First of all, we need to define what obsessions are. Obsessions are repetitive, intrusive thoughts that influence people to want to respond to them in specific ways. Those specific ways are referred to as compulsions, which are repetitive responses. As some prominent examples, a common obsession might be a fear of infection. The corresponding compulsion might be to wash one's hands frequently. If one's obsession is a fear of being burgled, the corresponding compulsion might be to constantly check the locks on all doors and windows. There are also some more abstract obsessions and compulsions, which may involve, for example, reciting certain numbers, certain words or certain phrases. Now, the important factor here is that OCD is a form of anxiety, which means that when a person experiences these repetitive obsessions, even if they know that these are only obsessions, that they're not necessarily reflective of reality, even if they're conscious of that, the underlying experience is that something bad will happen if they don't immediately respond to those obsessions with compulsions. And so when they try to interrupt that process, they might become incredibly anxious to the extent that it actually affects their executive functioning, which means their basic thinking and decision-making abilities. Once it reaches that severity, then it constitutes obsessive compulsive. But if somebody simply has particular routines or particular attention to detail, that's not obsessive compulsive. And again, often these phenomena are misportrayed, and we have to understand that this refers to a very specific condition, and not just anybody with an attention to detail is obsessive compulsive. And while it can be a source of humour for some, it's important to understand that people who suffer this condition in real life can suffer considerably, and it can affect their daily functioning. So thank you for joining me for this episode. I hope that I have cleared some misconceptions about certain terminology related to mental illness and about mental illness itself. If you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to hear them. Please feel free to contact me. If you'd like to have a discussion about any of the topics discussed today or any other topics, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to consider having you as a guest on the show. Also remember that you should not take what you see on the internet as advice. Please, if you believe that your own well-being or somebody else's well-being is at risk, please seek professional help. Until next time, take care.